The ambulance doors burst open beneath a sky the color of bruised steel, and St. Mercy Medical Center, already stretched thin by a citywide power fluctuation and a gridlocked evening storm, suddenly felt too small for the man they were bringing in. He arrived wrapped in chaos. Military police vehicles had cleared the route to the hospital less than 6 minutes earlier. A black SUV convoy still idled beneath the awning outside, red and blue emergency reflections cutting across rain-slick pavement. Two plainclothes federal agents flanked the gurney as paramedics rolled it through the sliding glass doors, shouting vitals over the shrill complaint of a portable monitor. Male, 62, unresponsive, episodes in transit, severe respiratory compromise, irregular pulse, blood pressure crashing, no known allergies confirmed, prior field surgery, possible internal bleed, possible toxin exposure. The patient's chest rose in shallow, ragged pulls, each breath sounding less like respiration and more like resistance. He wore no visible insignia now, no stars, no ribbons, no formal dread uniform, just a dark undershirt cut open down the front, soaked with rain and sweat, and a face so ashen it seemed carved from wax beneath the fluorescent water of the trauma bay. But even stripped of symbols, everyone in the room knew immediately that he was not ordinary. There are men whose authority survives even unconsciousness. General Adrian Vale was one of them. The moment his name was spoken aloud, the room changed. Doctors straightened. Residents stopped whispering. Nurses moved faster, not because they had to, but because instinct told them the stakes had just become larger than medicine. The head of emergency medicine, Dr. Richard Haverson, was already stepping into the trauma bay with the confidence of a man who believed the room belonged to him. Clear bay, too. Now, he snapped. I want arterial blood gas, full tox panel, chest imaging, fast ultrasound, and someone get me cardiology on standby. If he's decompensating, I want every option available before he stops giving them to us. He was sharp, expensive-looking, and deeply practiced in the art of sounding decisive before the facts arrived. The residents admired him. Administrators feared him. Most of the nurses tolerated him. Emma simply worked around him. She was at the medication counter when the gurney came in, already halfway through replacing a mislabeled fluid bag someone else had left hanging on a pre-op transfer. She moved by efficiency, her dark hair into the neat low bun, her pale blue hopes hardly hidden the navy fleece jacket that made her look like the trauma that by a number of them hummer her floor. A newer nurse. A softer nurse. The kind senior physicians rarely noticed unless they needed something fetched or fixed. She had been at St. Mercy for 4 months. Long enough to be known. Not long enough to be understood. Emma Haverson barked without looking at her. If you're done reorganizing saline, I need a fresh crash tray in bay too. No one else in the room missed the dismissive tone. Emma didn't react. She set the bag down, checked the seal on the tray, and rolled it into the trauma bay without a word. Try to keep up tonight, one of the residents muttered as he passed her, low enough to sound like a joke, loud enough to be heard. A few exhausted smiles followed. Emma said nothing. That, more than anything, seemed to amuse them. Because people are always more comfortable underestimating the quiet one. The gurney locked into place under the trauma lights. General Vale's breathing worsened almost immediately. Sats dropping, a respiratory tech said, 82 and falling. Get me non-rebreather oxygen. Move, Haverson snapped. The paramedic leaned in again, face tight. He coded for 6 seconds in transit, came back after compressions and pushed dose epi. We don't know what triggered it. One of his aides said he collapsed during a private security briefing. Security briefing with who? Haverson asked. The paramedic hesitated. No one would say. That answer did not help. And yet it fit. Men like Adrian Vale did not collapse in ordinary rooms. A cardiology fellow arrived still buttoning his coat. An internal medicine consultant stepped in behind him, already looking annoyed to have been called down. The room filled quickly with expertise, titles, and noise. And still, the general continued to slip. The monitor fluttered in unstable rhythm. His skin had the gray undertone of poor perfusion. There was no obvious trauma, no visible wound, no single dramatic injury to explain why one of the most heavily protected men in the country was dying on an emergency room table. That made the room more dangerous. Doctors prefer injuries they can point to. A punctured lung, a severed artery, a bleed they can open and stop. Invisible problems turn confidence into ego very quickly. Haverson placed 2 fingers against the general's neck, frowned, and turned to the resident nearest him. Push magnesium. Start him on a low-dose presser. If this is our rhythmic instability for metabolic insult, we buy time first and ask questions later. The resident nodded and moved. Emma's head lifted slightly. Just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But she noticed the medication order. And she noticed something else. General Vale's left hand. It had moved. Not much. Not a seizure. Not random muscle activity. A deliberate twitch. His fingers curled once against the sheet, then flattened again. Emma stepped half a pace closer to the bedside under the pretense of adjusting the oxygen line. His lips moved. No sound came out. Just the shape of a word. No one else saw it. No one else was looking. Because they were all looking at machines. At numbers. At tests that hadn't come back yet. Emma leaned in a fraction. General Vale's eyes opened. Not fully. Just enough to reveal pale, glassy irises searching through the light. He was not seeing the room. He was searching for something. Or someone. Then his lips moved again. This time a whisper came with it. So faint she almost missed it. Black Lantern. Emma froze. Not outwardly. Not in any way anyone else would have seen. But inside, something cold and old slid through her spine. Because she knew that phrase. Not from movies. Not from military fiction. Not from a briefing article or a forgotten documentary. From somewhere much worse. Somewhere real. Pressure's tanking. Someone shouted. The moment shattered. Haverson moved in harder. Why is he not responding? He snapped. What do we have? Nothing yet, cardiology said. No clear STEMI pattern. Rhythms unstable but not diagnostic. Ducts. Pending. Ultrasound? Negative for obvious abdominal fluid. Then what are we missing? Haverson barked. No one answered. Because that was the truth. They were missing something. And no one in that room, none of the specialists, none of the consultants, none of the men with prestigious credentials and expensive malpractice coverage knew what it was. General Vale convulsed once, sharply, his body arching just enough to trigger a fresh round of panic. Hold him. Push another line. He is losing airway. Haverson swore. Prep intubation. A nurse reached for the sedative kit. Emma's voice came quietly from the side of the bed. No. It was not loud. But in a room trained to respond to hierarchy, even a soft interruption sounded violent. Everyone looked at her. Haverson blinked once, irritated. What? Emma kept her eyes on the general. Don't intubate him. For 1 second, the room simply stared. Then Haverson let out a disbelieving breath. Excuse me? Emma did not raise her voice. If you sedate and intubate him now, you may lose the only response pattern he is still maintaining. The cardiology fellow frowned. What response pattern? Emma looked at the general's eyes. Then at his hand. Then back to the monitor. He's not failing from airway collapse, she said. He's fighting something neurological. Science. Then, predictably. That's not your call, Haverson said. His voice had gone colder now. Publicly colder. Because nothing irritates an arrogant man faster than being corrected in front of his audience. You're not assigned to this case, he continued, and unless you've secretly become a trauma attending in the last 10 minutes, you don't get to override airway protection. A resident laughed nervously. Another looked away. Emma did not move. General Vale's fingers curled again. This time harder. Like he was trying to hold on to the edge of consciousness with the last intact part of himself. His lips moved one more time. Black Lantern. Emma looked at him. Really looked. And the old memory hit her harder this time. Not a full image. Just fragments. A radio in a dark room. A coded phrase spoken through static. A protocol no civilian physician should ever know. Her pulse slowed. That was always how it happened. When other people panicked, she became quieter. More precise. More dangerous. Haverson misread her silence as surrender. He turned away from her and reached for the sedative tray. Push etomidate, he said. Emma stepped in. One hand not grabbing, not dramatic, just enough to stop the tray from moving. The entire room froze. Now even the consultants were watching. Because whatever this was, it had just crossed the invisible line between disagreement and defiance. Haverson stared at her hand, then at her face. "You need to move," he said. Emma met his gaze. No. That single word changed the temperature of the room. Not because she said it loudly. Because she said it like someone who was not afraid of what came next. The residents looked stunned. One of the security officers near the door shifted uneasily. The federal agents outside the glass had started paying closer attention. Haverson's face flushed. "You are interfering with a federal-level medical emergency," he said. "Do you understand how serious that is?" "Yes," Emma said. "Then step away." She didn't. General Vale's monitor screamed again. His heart rhythm fractured into something uglier. The oxygen alarm rose in pitch. The room was out of time. And Emma knew it. If they intubated him now, if they sedated away the last conscious reflex he still had, they would bury the only clue his body was still trying to give them. And he would die with every expert in the room insisting they had done everything correctly. So she did the one thing that would cost her. She broke protocol. She leaned over the general and said very clearly, very low, close enough for only him to hear. "Lantern actual, confirm." The general's eyes snapped open. Not fully. Not cleanly. But enough. Enough to prove she had reached something no one else in that room even knew existed. His hand shot up with sudden force and caught her wrists. The residents jumped. Security took a step forward. But General Adrian Vale, half-conscious, crashing, dying by inches, gripped her arm like a drowning man finding the one piece of solid ground in a flood. And with his last clear breath before the next collapse took him, he whispered the response. "Night Protocol 7. The room went silent. Because no one understood what they had just heard. Except Emma. And the moment she heard it, she knew exactly why no doctor in that room had been able to stabilize him. Because they were treating the wrong emergency. And if she didn't act now, he wouldn't survive long enough for anyone to apologize. Emma did not pull her wrist away. General Vale's grip was weak by ordinary standards, but under the circumstances it was startling, sudden, desperate, deliberate. His fingers locked around her like muscle memory had overridden failing physiology. And that, more than the code phrase itself, confirmed it. He was still orienting to command. Not to place. Not to people. To protocol. The room had no idea what it was looking at. "What did he say?" one of the residents whispered. Haverson didn't answer, because he had heard the words and understood none of them. Instead, he stepped in harder, irritation sharpening into something uglier. "That's enough," he said. "Security, remove her from the bedside." The security officer hesitated. Not because he was brave. Because the general still had her wrists. And there is something in the human brain that resists touching a dying man when he looks like he's chosen one person and one person only. Emma leaned in closer, ignoring Haverson completely now. "General," she said quietly, "can you hear me?" His eyes tracked to her. "Vale." "Yes." "Who gave you the phrase?" she asked. His lips trembled once. "Briefing room." "Was anyone else there?" His breathing hitched. Then, red folder left side. The monitor screamed again. His hand loosened. Then dropped. The general's head rolled slightly to one side as another wave of instability moved through him. The room erupted again. Pressures collapsing. "He's breaking down." "Push atropine." Haverson moved instantly, taking the moment back by force. "Enough of this," he snapped. "He's decompensating, and I'm not standing here while a floor nurse plays spy games over a crashing airway. Sedate him, now." The respiratory tech stepped forward. Emma turned. Vet. Not wild. Not emotional. But something in her face had changed enough that even Haverson noticed it. "If you sedate him," she said, "you may trigger complete autonomic failure." Science. Then Haverson barked out a short, humorless laugh. "Autonomic failure? From what?" Emma's eyes did not leave his. "From a challenge response neurotoxin." The room froze. Someone actually scoffed. One of the consultants blinked at her like she had just started speaking another language. Haverson stared. Then he said exactly what men like him always say when they hear something outside their framework. That's absurd. Emma did not argue. She stepped to the side of the bed and looked at the general's pupils again. One eye is lagging. His speech pattern is intermittent but command-responsive. Respiratory decline is irregular, not mechanical. Cardiac rhythm is unstable because his autonomic system is being disrupted, not because his heart is failing first. The cardiology fellow frowned. That would require exposure to. Yes, Emma said, cutting him off before he could wander into theory instead of action. Something highly specific. Haverson folded his arms. And where exactly did you train for this diagnosis, nurse? There it was. The public humiliation. The need to remind the room where she belonged. Emma ignored the question. That only made him angrier. I asked you something. And I'm trying to keep him alive, she said. No heat. No performance. Just fact. That landed harder than a shouted argument would have. One of the older nurses, Carla, who had been at St. Mercy longer than Haverson, looked between them and then at the general. What do you need? She asked Emma quietly. Haverson snapped his head toward her. Excuse me? Carla didn't flinch. You heard me. That tiny fracture in the room's hierarchy matter. Because once one person steps out of orbit, others start realizing they can too. Emma moved immediately. Cold saline flush, external cooling pads, no sedatives, no paralytics. I need a glucose strip, a pen light, and a blood pressure cuff that actually calibrates. One of the residents stared. You think he's poisoned? I think he's being physiologically interrogated, Emma said. No one in the room knew what that meant. But the phrase alone chilled the air. Haverson stepped forward again. No, absolutely not. We are not turning a hospital trauma bay into a paranoid fantasy because one nurse watched too many covert thriller documentaries. That got a few uncomfortable laughs. But fewer than he expected. Because now the room had seen something he hadn't. General Vale had responded to her. Only her. And whatever she was saying, however impossible it sounded, was at least attached to evidence. That made it dangerous. Because arrogant men can dismiss ignorance. They struggle much more with unexplained results. The general convulsed again. This time harder. His jaw clenched, one shoulder jerking violently against the bed. The monitor fluttered into a jagged, ugly rhythm. V-Tech. Charge the paddles. Moo. Haverson seized the moment. Clear him. Emma looked at the screen. Then at the general. Then at his hand. His fingers were curled inward now. Rigid. Not from arrhythmia. From neurological misfire. If you shock him, she said, you could stop him completely. We are past your guesses, Haverson snapped. The paddles were already being positioned. The room moved around authority because authority was loud. But Emma had seen this once before. Not in a hospital. In a concrete room with no windows and a man whose rank had required silence even while he died. They had shocked him 3 times before someone realized his heart wasn't the first system under attack. By then it had been too late. She was not going to watch that happen again. So she did something she knew would end her night, maybe her job. She stepped between the paddles and the patient. The room stopped breathing. Haverson stared at her like he genuinely could not process what he was seeing. Moo. No. Moo. No. His face flushed dark. You are done here. Emma didn't look at him. She looked at Carla. Get me the cooling pads. Carla moved. Not because she understood all of it. Because she trusted competence more than title. That was enough. The resident holding the paddles looked helplessly between Haverson and Emma. The cardiology fellow, to his credit, hesitated. Then lowered his hand. Wait, he said. Haverson spun on him. Are you serious? The fellow swallowed. His rhythm isn't clean, V-Tech. It's mixed. She might be right. That was all it took. Not agreement. Just enough doubt to interrupt momentum. Emma moved fast. Cooling pads to the neck and underarms. Cold saline flushed through the line. Penlight to the pupils. Fingerstick glucose. 72, Carla said. Keep it there. What exactly are you doing? The internal medicine consultant demanded. Emma answered while working. Buying his nervous system time. The consultant blinked. That's not a treatment. It is if you know what was used. Haverson's voice dropped into something more dangerous now. Public control. Security, he said, without looking away from her. Remove Nurse Emma from this room immediately. The security officer stepped forward this time. He had to. Protocol demanded it. Emma never looked up. General, she said quietly, leaning near the patient's ear, if you can hear me, I need the trigger. His eyelids flutter. No response. The security officer reached for her shoulder. And then the general spoke. One word. Who's barely human through the strain in his throat. Belladonna. The room froze. Even Haverson. Emma's head snapped up. Not because the word surprised her. Because it confirmed everything. Belladonna wasn't the toxin. It was the code class. A designation. An operational category used for compounds designed to mimic naturally occurring neurological collapse. The kind of thing that turned murder into medicine if the wrong people were holding the chart. She turned to Carla. Do we have physostigmine? Carla blinked. In toxicology lockup. How much? 1 amp, maybe 2. Bet. Haverson stepped directly into her path. No. Carla stopped. Emma looked at him. He had crossed from dismissive to obstructive now. And that was somehow more dangerous than ignorance. You do not get to start administering a high-risk antidote based on code words and improvisation, he said. Emma's voice stayed level. If I'm wrong, he gets bradycardic support and we monitor. And if you're wrong in the other direction? He dies anyway. That landed. Huh. Because it was true. No one in that room could deny it. They had already been losing him. The monitor made that obvious every 10 seconds. The cardiology fellow spoke again, quieter this time. She's not entirely off base. Physostigmine can reverse central anticholinergic syndrome if. Haverson rounded on him. Do not validate this. But it was too late. The room had tilted. Just enough. Carla moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She simply stepped around Haverson and headed for toxicology lockup. He actually looked stunned. As if the possibility that people might stop obeying him had never occurred to him before. The federal agents outside the bay had moved closer now. They were watching. Listening. And if Haverson had any instinct for self-preservation, he would have realized this was no longer a private power struggle. But men like him rarely realize the room has changed until it's already too late. The general's breathing hitched again. His pulse stuttered. Emma leaned in and lowered her voice. Stay with me. His eyelids trembled. No response. Then, just barely. His fingers twitched once against the sheet. That was enough. Enough to know he was still in there. Enough to keep going. Carla came back with the amp. Swell. Bless. Potentially life-saving. Potentially dangerous. Exactly the kind of decision hospitals fear and battlefields demand. Haverson looked at it like it was a weapon. Do not hand that to her. Carla did anyway. Emma took it without triumph. Without hesitation. And for one brief, razor-thin moment. The entire trauma bay balanced on a single choice. If she was wrong, she would be blamed for everything. If she was right, she would still probably be punished for how she got there. But General Adrian Bale would live. And for Emma, that had always been the simpler equation. She snapped the amp open. Drew the dose. And just before she pushed it into the line, the trauma bay doors opened. Not gently. Not politely. Authority entered the room like weather. 2 military officers stepped inside, followed by a man in a dark overcoat with no visible insignia and the unmistakable stillness of someone whose title never needed to be worn out loud. His eyes went first to the general, then to the syringe in Emma's hand, then to Haverson. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to terrify everyone. Who, he asked, gave the order to intubate him? No one answered immediately. Because no one in the room knew who he was. And men like that were always the most dangerous. He was not loud, not theatrical, not decorated in visible symbols of command. He simply stood there in a dark overcoat still damp from rain, with two military officers flanking him and the kind of stillness that made every ego in the room suddenly feel cheap. Haverson recovered first. Of course he did. Men like him always speak first when they feel control slipping. I did, he said, drawing himself up, and unless you're planning to take over airway management yourself, I suggest. The man didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed on the general, then on Emma, then on the uncapped syringe in her hand. Has he received any sedative? He asked. Emma answered before anyone else could. No. That got his attention. Not because she had spoken. Because she had answered correctly and immediately, without performing for him. His gaze sharpened. What has he said? Haverson stepped in again, voice clipped and irritated. This is a controlled emergency environment, and I'm not comfortable discussing a federal patient's condition with an unidentified. The man reached into his coat and held up a black credential wallet. He did not wave it. He did not explain it. He simply opened it long enough for the military officers nearest the door to visibly change posture. One of the federal agents outside the bay straightened so fast it was almost involuntary. That was enough. The room understood. This man did not need introductions. He needed compliance. Haverson's face shifted. Only slightly. But then now. The man closed the credential wallet and looked at Emma again. What has he said? This time, the room let her answer. He responded to a challenge phrase, she said. He confirmed Night Protocol 7. Then he gave the class identifier Belladonna. The man in the overcoat went very still. Then he nodded once. That one motion carried more validation than anything Emma had received since the general rolled through those doors. He looked at the syringe. How much? Initial low-dose reversal, she said. Enough to test central response before full destabilization. He nodded again. Then, finally, turned to Haverson. She's correct. The room changed. Not subtly. Not gradually. Instantly. Every person in that trauma bay felt it. The shift in gravity. The redistribution of authority. Haverson blinked. I'm sorry. The man's expression didn't change. General Vale was briefed this afternoon under compartmented protocol, he said. If he spoke Belladonna and challenge confirmed, then he is not experiencing spontaneous collapse. He has likely been exposed to an engineered anticholinergic interference agent. Silence. Absolute. The cardiology fellow looked physically ill. One of the residents mouthed something under his breath that might have been, "Oh my God." Carla just stared at Emma. Not with confusion now. With dawning horror. Because the impossible thing the rookie nurse had just said had been true. Haverson's voice came back thin and strained. That's not possible. The man in the overcoat looked at him for the first time. And in that look was enough contempt to make a lesser man leave the room voluntarily. It became possible the moment your staff failed to recognize what he was trying to tell you. No one breathed. Haverson's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You can't seriously expect me to accept an improvised antidote protocol based on classified response architecture you were never cleared to understand, the man said. That ended it. Not because Haverson agreed. Because the room did. Because the room had just been given permission to stop pretending this was a normal hospital crisis with a normal hospital chain of command. And once that illusion dies, arrogance loses a lot of its oxygen. The man looked back to Emma. Proceed. One word. That was all. No flirt. No praise. Just the thing she had needed from the beginning. Permission to do the job. Emma pushed the antidote. Slowly. Controlled. The line carried the clear medication into General Vale's system while every person in the room watched as if the act itself might split the world into before and after. Because, in a way, it already had. The general's pulse remained unstable for 3 long seconds. Then 5. Then 10. His monitor still looked wrong. Still dangerous. Still fragile. But something changed. Subtle at first. His jaw unclenched. One shoulder, rigid until now, released by degrees. His breathing still rough, still uneven, began to lose that unnatural, neurologically trapped quality that had terrified Emma the moment she saw it. Carla leaned in toward the monitor. His heart rate's evening out. The cardiology fellow stepped closer. Sinus rhythm is re-emerging. Another resident blinked. Pressure's climbing. No one said anything else. Because there are moments in medicine where a room full of people realizes, all at once, that they were about to kill someone correctly. And that silence is different from every other kind. General Adrian Vale took one deep, involuntary breath. The kind the body only takes when something inside it has finally stopped fighting itself. Then his eyes opened. Not fully. Not cleanly. But enough. Enough to look around. Enough to orient. Enough to find a map. He stared at her for a long second that felt like 10. Then, in a voice made of gravel and exhaustion, he whispered, "Good." That one word hit harder than any applause could have. Because it came from the man who had nearly died. And because he knew exactly what had just happened. Emma leaned closer. "You're still unstable," she said quietly. "Don't try to talk." His mouth twitched with what might have been a smile if he had strength for one. Then his eyes shifted to the man in the overcoat. Recognition. Immediate. West, the general rasped. So that was his name. Or at least the one used in rooms like this. West stepped closer to the bed. "You're secure," he said. "Can you confirm source?" The general's breathing stayed shallow. But his eyes sharpened enough to prove that the antidote had reached what it needed to reach. "Folder," he whispered, "left side attaché." Emma's head turned immediately toward the general's belongings. A black leather attaché case sat near the far wall beside two military officers who had apparently not yet understood that the object in their custody might now be evidence in an assassination attempt. West saw it too. "Do not touch that case with bare hands," he said. One of the officers froze mid-step. "Sir." "Glove. Containment. Now." The officers moved instantly. No hesitation. Because unlike the hospital staff, they recognized the tone of someone who had seen the next layer before the rest of the room even knew there was one. Haverson, somehow still standing in this disaster of his own making, tried one last time to reclaim relevance. "This is becoming highly irregular," he said, voice thin with outrage. "If there's a contamination risk, then this hospital needs to be notified through proper emergency." West cut him off with a glance. "Your hospital has already been notified," he said. "What it failed to do was listen to the one person in the room who recognized the threat before you made it worse." No one in the trauma bay looked at Haverson now. Not directly. But that was worse. Because humiliation becomes much louder in a room that has stopped pretending not to see it. The attaché was placed carefully on a cleared instrument table. A military officer snapped on gloves and looked to West. "Open it." West looked at Emma. That did not go unnoticed. Not by the room. Not by Haverson. Not by Emma herself. "Left side compartment," she said. He said red folder. The officer opened the case. Inside were the expected contents: first documents, secure envelopes, a phone in a hardened case, reading glasses, a sealed pen set. Then the hidden compartment on the left side. A slim panel. A recessed latch. A red folder. The room watched like it was witnessing a bomb disposal. The officer extracted it carefully and laid it flat. West stepped closer. "Open it." Inside the folder was not paper. It was a thin foil packet. Medical-looking. Unmarked. And beneath it, a black card with a single line of printed text. No insignia. No logo. Just 5 words. "Black Lantern has been reopened." The room turned cold. Not metaphorically. Something about the sentence itself felt wrong in the air, like it had entered carrying its own weather. West's face hardened in a way that made Emma's stomach tighten. Because now she knew this was not merely familiar to him. It was personal. The general saw the card too and closed his eyes for 1 second, as if the sight of it cost him more than the poison had. Carla whispered, "What does that mean?" No one answered her. Not because they were cruel. Because some sentences belong to histories too ugly to explain quickly. West looked at the foil packet. Then at a map. "You recognize the phrase." It wasn't a question. "Still," she answered. "Does." Though. That was the first dangerous question. Not medically. Personally. The room went quiet again. Because everyone understood, suddenly, that the answer to that question was not going to be ordinary either. Emma did not speak right away. Her face remained calm. Her hands remained steady. But inside, the old wall had already begun to crack. Not because she wanted to explain herself. Because she knew exactly what Black Lantern had been. And if it had truly been reopened, then tonight was not random. It was not about one general. It was not even about one hospital. It was about a part of the world that had been buried because it should never have existed in the first place. West watched her. The general watched her. Even Haverson, despite everything, was now too stunned to interrupt. Emma looked down at the foil packet. At the black card. At the 5 words she had hoped never to hear again. Then she answered in the only way she could without lying. "I've seen what that phrase does to a room," she said. West's expression changed. "Not much. But enough. Recognition. Not of the phrase. Of the..." And that was worse. Because now she knew something she had been trying not to consider since the general first whispered the code. This was not the first time someone from that buried world had recognized her. It was simply the first time it had happened under hospital lights. West took one slow breath. Then said, very quietly, "That means they know you're alive too." The sentence did not land on the room all at once. For Carla, it landed as confusion first. For the residents, it landed as intrigue. For Haverson, humiliation was still too loud in his head for comprehension to fully take hold. But for Anna, it landed exactly as intended. Fleeing. Leo. Because if West was right, then tonight had not just been a targeted attack on General Adrian Vale. It had also been a signal. A message sent through a dying man and a reopened code phrase to flush ghosts out into the open. And ghosts, once noticed, do not get to go back to being ordinary. Emma's expression did not change. That was the first skill she had ever truly mastered. Not medicine. Not triage. Not battlefield improvisation. Stillness. The ability to feel the floor vanish beneath you and let no one in the room hear the crack. General Vale was still watching her. His breathing had improved enough to make the watching deliberate now. He knew what West had just said. He also knew what it meant. That was written all over the fatigue in his face. The attaché case sat open on the instrument table like a wound no one had time to close. The black card remained visible. Black Lantern has been reopened. 5 words. Enough to pull dead histories into living rooms. Enough to get men killed in ways official records would never describe correctly. West turned to one of the military officers. "Seal the packet. Full chain of custody. Nobody touches it without containment." "Yes, sir." The officer moved. The room obeyed him now without friction. That was the thing about real authority. It does not need volume. Haverson tried to recover some of his own. He straightened his coat, adjusted his posture, and stepped toward the table as though proximity alone might return relevance to him. "If there is an active biohazard or chemical exposure issue," he said, "then administration and hospital security need immediate formal notification." West looked at him. This time not with contempt. With boredom. "There is no scenario," he said, "in which hospital administration outranks what just happened in this room." Haverson's face tightened. "That may be, but this is still my emergency department." West's expression remained flat. "No," he said, "it was your emergency department." Silence. Absolute. Even the residents looked away this time. Because they knew what had just happened. Haverson had not merely been corrected. He had been removed without the paperwork catching up yet. And there's a very specific kind of humiliation in being stripped of authority while still standing in your own shoes. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then, because men like him cannot survive without one last attempt at self-preservation, he looked toward Emma and said the worst possible thing he could have said. She concealed critical information from attending staff. The room shifted. Not because the accusation was valid. Because it was desperate. And desperation in the wrong mouth always sounds ugly. West didn't even glance at Emma before answering. "She prevented you from intubating and likely killing a 4-star general during an active covert poisoning event," he said. "I would be very careful how you phrase your complaints." That ended it. Not because Haverson accepted defeat. Because he had finally realized the people in this room were no longer his audience. He stepped back. Not gracefully. Not with dignity. Just enough to avoid being in the center of the next thing. And there was definitely a next thing. Because General Vale, despite the antidote and the partial stabilization, was still unstable. Emma checked his pulse again. Stronger than before. Still irregular. His pupils were improving. His breathing had lost that locked neurological rhythm. But the antidote had only interrupted the cascade. It had not solved whatever had been introduced into his system. She looked at West. He needs ICU-level monitoring, but not a normal transfer. West nodded once. Agreed. There may be delayed rebound. I know. You'll also need to screen his entire detail. That got attention. One of the federal agents outside the base stepped in. What? Emma didn't look at him. Because if he was dosed in proximity during a secure briefing, then anyone else in that room may have had secondary contact. The agent went pale. West turned to him immediately. Lock down every individual who entered that briefing environment. No one leaves. No one calls out. Phones collected. HVAC review, water source review, surface swabs, all of it. The agent nodded sharply and moved. The room's center of gravity had shifted entirely now. This was no longer a trauma case. It was an incident. And incidents of this kind had a way of swallowing institutions whole. General Vale stirred again. His fingers twitched once, then reached weakly toward the bed rail. Emma leaned closer. I'm here. His eyes open. A little clearer now. He found her quickly. That more than the monitors told her the antidote had hit what mattered. Folder he rasped. I saw it. His jaw tightened. Not all. Emma frowned. What do you mean? He swallowed against dryness and pain. Inside flap. West heard it too. He moved the red folder and carefully lifted the inner lining. Taped beneath the fold. A small square memory card. The size of a fingernail. The kind of object people kill entire teams over. West's face changed again. And this time Emma didn't need him to explain why. Because she already knew. Black Lantern had never just been a phrase. It had been a compartment. A program buried under so many layers of deniability that even people adjacent to it were taught not to ask the wrong questions. Recovery units. Neurochemical testing. Behavioral override work hidden under resilience language. Assets who disappeared from rosters and returned with eyes that looked slightly less human. And medics. Always medics. Because someone had to keep the body alive while the mind was being turned into a weapon. West held the memory card up between two gloved fingers. Then looked at Emma. You know what this is? Again, not a question. Again, dangerous. Emma looked at the card. Then at General Vale. Then away. Because the truth was simple and unbearable. She did know. Not from clearance. From survival. That was worse. Carla, still trying to keep up with a night that had stopped making sense 20 minutes ago, looked at Emma and finally asked what the whole room had begun silently asking. Who are you? The question sat in the room. Heavy. Who am? Far more intimate than West's operational questions. Because Carla wasn't asking about files or code words or classified architecture. She was asking about the woman she had eaten vending machine crackers with at 2 a.m. on bad shifts. The woman who restocked syringes without being asked. The woman residents mocked because she never played their games. The woman who had just saved a general by recognizing a phrase no doctor in the room had even heard before. Emma looked at Carla. And for one dangerous second, something almost like grief moved behind her face. Not because she wanted to answer. Because normal life was ending in real time, and Carla deserved at least the dignity of knowing that Emma understood what was being lost. Before she could respond, General Vale spoke again. Medic. The word was soft, but it cut through everything. Everyone looked at him. He was staring at Emma, not with confusion now, not with the half-conscious searching from before. With memory. With certainty. And with something like old battlefield trust. Still move too quiet, he murmured. That almost made Carla laugh from sheer disbelief if the room had not been so tense. West didn't smile, but he understood exactly what that sentence meant. A compliment from a man like Adrian Vale did not sound like praise. It sounded like a field report. Emma adjusted the general's blanket. You need to conserve your energy. His eyes remained on her. Didn't think, he whispered, they'd find you in scrubs. The line landed in the room like another live wire. Because now the mystery was no longer abstract. The patient knew her. Not socially. Operationally. The team of military officers knew her. West had recognized the phrase she recognized. And somewhere beyond the walls of St. Mercy, someone had poisoned a general and hidden a message in his attaché case to announce that a buried program was active again. That meant one thing. Emma had not been accidentally standing in the wrong place when this happened. She had been in the exact right place for the exact wrong reason. And the people who had done this had expected her to notice. West turned to the officers. We move him under internal seal. No digital chart expansion. No standard transport request. He doesn't leave through the main ICU corridor. One of the officers nodded. Yes, sir. Then West looked at Emma. You're coming with us. It wasn't phrased as an invitation. Carla's head turned sharply. What? Haverson, sensing an opportunity to become useful by aligning with authority, immediately spoke up. That would be completely inappropriate. She's still under hospital employment and... West didn't let him finish. She is now a material witness in a federal-level covert attack and likely a named target in an active hostile operation. The room went still again. Named target. There it was. No more ambiguity. No more maybe. The thing Emma had already known in her bones since the moment the general whispered Black Lantern was now spoken aloud in front of witnesses. She was not just involved. She was in danger. Carla looked at her like the floor had vanished. Emma didn't answer her. Not because she didn't want to. Because if she did, she might have to say goodbye with her eyes. And she did not have time for that. Not yet. Instead, she looked at West and asked the only question that mattered. How many people know I'm here? West held her gaze for one long beat. Then answered. Too many. That answer did not frighten Emma. Not because she was fearless. Because fear requires uncertainty. And uncertainty had ended the moment General Adrian Vale whispered a dead code phrase in a public hospital. Too many. That simply confirmed what she had already begun calculating. If Black Lantern had been reopened, if someone had enough access to poison a 4-star general and plant a message in his secured briefcase, then the net around this night had been cast long before the ambulance ever arrived. St. Mercy had not become dangerous when the general rolled through its doors. It had already been compromised. Emma's eyes moved once across the room. The medication station. The unattended terminals. The residents still trying not to stare. The trauma bay doors. The federal agents. The attaché case. The black card. And finally, her, who was still standing there with a half-open package of sterile gauze in one hand and a face that had not yet decided whether this was betrayal, fear, or grief. Probably all three. West was already issuing low, precise instructions to the officers. Secondary route, freight corridor only, sweep cameras, lock down all bay recordings from the last 40 minutes. No cloud sync, no civilian archive. One of the officers moved instantly. The other stayed near the attaché and memory card. The room had become a machine around them. Emma stayed still. Because she knew this stage. This was the moment after survival and before consequences. The moment where everyone who mattered began quietly rearranging reality. General Vale's breathing remained more stable now, though still fragile. His skin had regained a little color, but not enough to make anyone with sense comfortable. He was alive. That was not the same thing as safe. Emma stepped to the bedside and checked the Roman 4 line again. His pulse is better, Carla said softly, almost like she needed to contribute something normal to survive this. Emma nodded once. For now. Carla swallowed. Then, quieter. You knew before he said it, didn't you? That question was not for the room. Not for Wes. Not for the military. Just for the woman she thought she knew. Emma adjusted the line without looking up. I knew enough. Carla gave a tiny, wounded laugh that died almost immediately. That is such a terrifying answer. It almost would have been funny in another life. Not this one. Before Emma could say anything else, one of the military officers at the door stiffened. A subtle movement. But in rooms like this, subtle is where danger lies. West noticed instantly. What? The officer touched his earpiece, listening. Then his face changed. Sir, he said, low and controlled, hospital security just flagged an unauthorized access event on the East Service elevator. Emma's head lifted immediately. How long ago? 3 minutes. West's expression hardened. Direction? Downward access first, then up. That was wrong. Very wrong. No one used East Service unless they knew the building. Supplies, waste transfer, mechanical routing. Invisible movement. The kind people choose when they don't want cameras and civilians involved. Emma's pulsed it in spite. It narrowed. That old cold focus arriving again. Whoever planted this, she said, glancing toward the black card and foil packet, didn't expect the general to make it this far. West looked at her. No. So now they need confirmation. The officer near the door frowned. Confirmation of what? Emma met his eyes. Whether he talked. That landed. What? Because if she was right and she was then someone was moving inside St. Mercy right now, not to rescue, not to retrieve, but to clean up. Witnesses. Evidence. Anyone who had seen the wrong thing. West turned immediately. Block every service corridor on this floor. Already trying, the officer said. Facilities is saying the east panel isn't responding. Then don't ask facilities. Override manually. Yes, sir. He moved. That. The room shifted again. Not into panic. Into pre-contact. The specific kind of silence that comes before trained people start choosing where they want to be standing when violence arrives. Carla looked around, finally beginning to understand that this was no longer merely a bizarre medical incident. This was danger. Real danger. Inside the building. She looked at Emma. What do I do? Emma answered without hesitation. Stay behind the bed if anything happens. Not the wall, the bed, metal frame, lower profile. Carla blinked. Then nodded immediately. Because even if she did not understand Emma's past, she understood that those were not guesses. General Vale stirred again. His eyes opened more clearly this time, though pain still lived behind them. He looked first at Wes, then at Emma, then toward the attaché case. And in a voice still scraped raw by poison and effort, he said, Not just me. West stepped closer. What? The general swallowed hard. The list? His hand moved weakly. Toward the red folder. Then toward the memory card. Then stopped. Emma understood before anyone else did. There's a target list on the card, she said. West's jaw tightened. The general closed his eyes once in exhausted confirmation. That changed everything. Because one poisoned general was a covert attack. A list meant campaign. Operation. Continuation. The room had just gone from witnessing an attempted assassination to standing in the opening minutes of something much larger. One of the federal agents stepped fully into the bay now. We need to get him out. Yes, West said, but not through any route they've already mapped. The agent looked confused. This building has limited secure exits. West's eyes moved once across the room. Then landed on Emma. Do you know another way? The question would have sounded absurd from almost anyone else. From him, it sounded like trust. Or necessity. Maybe both. Emma thought for less than 2 seconds. Old imaging corridor, she said. Basement level MRI access route. It was sealed after the wing remodel, but maintenance still uses the bypass for utility checks. The federal agent frowned. How do you know that? Emma didn't answer. Carla did. She fixed a ruptured supply line down there on night shift last month because facilities never showed up. That was true. Also not the whole truth. West nodded once. Can it take a bed? With effort. He turned to the officers. We move in 90 seconds. Haverson, who had been silent long enough to become dangerous again, suddenly found his voice. This is insanity, he said. You cannot just extract a critical patient through abandoned infrastructure because of some paranoid. West turned so sharply that even Haverson stopped mid-sentence. Then, with terrifying calm, West said, "Doctor, if one more unauthorized person enters this floor while you're still talking, I will personally have you escorted out of your own department." That ended it. Completely. Haverson stepped back. And for the first time all night, he looked what he actually was. Not powerful. Just in a way. Emma began disconnecting non-essential monitoring with Carla's help. Portable leads. Battery-backed oxygen. Travel-compatible fluids. Her hands moved with smooth speed. No wasted motion. The kind of preparation that looked almost peaceful to people who had never packed a wounded body for movement under threat. Carla followed every instruction instantly now. No jokes. No hesitation. No more rookie. General Vale looked at Emma while she worked. His voice was quieter than before. "Thought you were gone." Emma secured the transport line. "So did I." His eyes held hers for a second longer. Something unspoken moved there. Not romance. Not nostalgia. The kind of battlefield recognition that lives beyond ordinary categories. Then he said, very softly, "Sorry." That nearly stopped her. Nearly. Because men like Adrian Vale did not apologize casually. And they certainly did not do it while half-poisoned in a hospital bed. That meant whatever he was apologizing for was old, deep, and not about tonight. Emma didn't ask. Because she already knew enough to feel the shape of it. And because there wasn't time. One of the officers at the hall entrance suddenly raised a hand. Movement. The word was barely above a whisper. Every person in the room froze. The east service corridor beyond the trauma bay was mostly out of view from where they stood. Just a stretch of dim institutional hallway under tired fluorescent light. Empty. Silent. Then, a shadow crossed the far wall. Pass. Thought. Not staff. Not random. Purposeful. The federal agent drew. One of the military officers moved to cover the angle. Carla's breathing went shallow. General Vale's monitor ticked louder in the silence. West didn't raise his voice. "Move now." The room broke into motion. The bed unlocked. Portable monitor lifted. Oxygen line transfer. Emma took the left side rail. Carla took the fluids. Two officers took lead and rear. West stayed near the head of the bed. And as they began moving General Adrian Vale out of Trauma Bay 2 and into the dim emergency corridor beyond, the overhead lights flicker. Was. Twice. Then half the floor dropped into emergency red. Carla gasped. Someone somewhere in the building screamed. And from the far end of the corridor, a fire door slammed shut with mechanical force. Not from the storm. Not from coincidence. From control. The hospital had just become a trap. And whoever was inside it had decided to stop waiting.